All right, let's get her done, fellas, ladies, gentlemen's notes. Last set of notes, number 37. Species. I'm on the wrong page here. So we're kind of finishing up like how humans are destroying and getting rid of all the plants and animals on Earth, and how we can fix that and counteract it. So let's make a difference, Donovan. Species in a given ecosystem compete for resources like territory. We hear you, Rooster. Territory, food, mates, habitat. And this competition may lead to endangerment or extinction. So how does it possibly lead to endangerment or extinction? Isn't competition a good thing?
No. Too much competition makes it harder.
Too much competition, or competition when you have limited resources that maybe you're not used to, can be a bad thing. We talked about earlier in the year the idea of the competitive exclusion principle, where like no two species can occupy the same niche, or one will do better than the other and the other will have to leave or die out. And so when you have organisms that are adapted to an environment, they're adapted to competing for certain aspects in the niche. And then you throw humans into the mix and we start depleting resources, then it puts more of a strain and there's less resources, and then it makes it more likely for some individuals to die out because of those less resources available, coupled with the competition that they already have to deal with. Okay? Number 497, or excuse me, turn to page 497. So a lot of these stresses and competition and factors make it difficult for organisms to survive. A good example is our friends the Florida panther. So in Florida, these panthers already having to compete with what? Alligators, those big boas that are pythons that are running around. You got people that are killing deer and other food sources. And not to mention pollution, habitat destruction. The number one reason that Florida panthers numbers are low now, they get killed from what thing?
Hurricane.
It's illegal. You can't kill them for that.
Hurricane.
Number one way to get killed? Run over. So because of this fragmentation and splitting up of habitats and them having to move from place to place to get the food and resources they need, the number one way they get killed is getting run over on the road. And so we see this a lot with deer, but there's only about 80 to 100 individuals left here in Florida. And so this is an endangered species where you have a small number of individuals left, and because of that, you have limited diversity. They actually brought in, back in the late 90s, they brought in 8. So panther, catamount, puma, mountain lion. Did I leave anything off the list? All of those are basically the same thing. They're what we would call mountain lion here, or Florida panther. It's a subspecies of mountain lion, basically because it's kind of isolated down in Florida, but it's still close enough related where it can interbreed. So they brought in eight from mountain lions they'd captured in Texas, set them loose in Florida to try to increase the biodiversity there. And the population, they thought it was down to about 20 or 30. Now it's up to about 80 or 100, which is still really low. So maybe it did help a little bit, but still you've got this problem with limited habitats, lots of development in Florida, a lot of people in Florida, and then a lot of them are getting run over just because as they move and try to access and get enough food, it's easy to get run over. I mean, if you're an animal, it's hard to gauge a car, how fast it's going, what's going on. Those lights shining at you.
In Jekyll Island, there's like this turtle hospital, and it's just for turtles. And there's like all these signs everywhere because when they built the roads, like a bunch of the turtles started getting run over.
People run over them.
Like this big deal, and they showed me like a turtle that was like having surgery because it got run over.
Yeah, that's a big. I haven't talked about that with any other classes, but sea turtles. Maybe we talked about sea turtles, did we?
Kind of.
A little bit. There's 7 different species of sea turtles. 6 of them are endangered. The other one's threatened. And we went to Costa Rica and did some work with the sea turtles. And so, but we have a lot of sea turtles here that they'll come up and lay like in Gulf Shores, Jekyll Island, all throughout the Caribbean coast. And a lot of it was due to poaching, long line fishing nets, pollution, a variety of, like they eat plastic bags and die. There's a variety of reasons. But one of the big ones is those babies, when they hatch out, they're like programmed to go toward the light, which is usually the moon when they hatch out. And so in a lot of places where there's a lot of light pollution, where there's like buildings and stuff that people have built and condos and whatnot, they will go the opposite way. So they'll go away from the ocean. And then they wind up getting on roads and getting run over, and they just never make it because they've got enough obstacles as it is. So a lot of times I've seen, like in Gulf Shores, when a nest is supposed to hatch out, like you'll see a bunch of people gathered around it, and they'll have like a little roadway almost made down to the beach, and everybody kind of encourages them down and make sure, you know, a seagull or something doesn't get them before they get there, which usually kills a lot of sea turtles. So there's been a huge effort to save the species. I don't know if y'all heard about during that big cold spell in Texas, like people were getting sea turtles and throwing them in their car because they were freezing because it was so cold. Did y'all hear about this?
No.
There were like that. I want to say like hundreds or maybe into the thousands of like sea turtles people were keeping inside temporarily while it was so cold because it was just too cold for them to be in the water when that big cold spell happened. Anyway, I said, y'all need to, I'm going to start a TikTok and I'm just going to do strictly news. News because y'all are too lazy to actually look and read any news, but you might scroll through my TikTok news.
I would actually look at that if it was on TikTok.
Yeah, I'll look at it.
Yeah, like that time, you know, that I was talking about the Chinese doing those anal swabs for COVID. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that people need to know. Right, Andrew? You just sleep for that. Yes.
Mountain lions can whistle.
What?
Mountain lions can Izzy told me that yesterday. She came into 7th period and she was like, did you know mountain lions can whistle? And then we watched a video of mountain lions whistling. It is the cutest thing ever.
I learned something new today. Mountain lions can whistle. Mountain lions can whistle. Go, Colby.
When we were talking about sea turtles, we were deep sea fishing down at the beach, and we saw a sea turtle, so we drove up to it, and it got eaten by a shark right in front of us.
Like while you watched it?
Like a shark came up and started like biting its
Flippers.
Were y'all scared?
Save it.
Y'all seem to be pretty calm at the time.
Were y'all scared of the shark?
How big was the shark?
But you'd still be
It wasn't like huge, but it would kind of come up like.
It was just beating its flippers, though.
Yeah.
Like tiger sharks, they can like, tiger sharks will eat like a tire or a license plate. I mean, those things are like garbage disposals. But they said they're strong enough where they can like crack one.
Was it like a baby shark or like a shark?
I mean, it was
Like a big bull shark?
probably as big as me.
Yeah, and those turtle flippers are just hanging out. It's not like they can hide their flippers. You see that a lot where like, sometimes, did it kill it?
Yeah.
Could you tell?
Yeah, it was gonna die.
It was going to die. Sometimes you'll see one with like a missing flipper because like a shark's come and nipped it off and like it survived. But most of the time I would suspect it wouldn't. All right, anyway, number 30.
Around a shark.
I would still.
He was in a boat. He wasn't swimming with the sharks.
I would still be scared if he
Still in
was
it.
on a boat.
A shark can get you in
We
a
got a
boat.
shark attack.
Y'all ever watch
All right. Hashtag salt life. Number 37. Species in a given ecosystem compete for resources. Like, did we already read that?
Yeah.
38. Strategies to protect animal populations include criminalizing poaching, protecting animal habitats, and legislation. So we need to go through a few of these here. One, most poaching, I would suspect, has already been criminalized. Now, what's the problem in a lot of areas with those laws that we have? They're not enforced. Now, I would say in the U.S., they're enforced pretty well. For those of us that hunt and fish, have probably encountered a game warden or two in our day. And so they're going around checking to make sure that you have your license and are hunting or fishing the appropriate thing at the appropriate time with the appropriate gear. And if not, then you get a big fine. Anyway, there are a lot of places like Central South America, Central Africa, Southeast Asia, where they may have laws in place and on the books, but they do not have the money or resources to enforce them. And so that's a big problem when you have areas like that throughout the equator, the tropics, where you have lots of diversity and you don't have a way of enforcing that. And so that's a big issue. And you have this huge drive of like a fur trade where animals are killed for their fur. You have a lot of animals that are killed or that are captured like exotic turtles and reptiles, other reptiles and birds that are sold all over the world. And like most of them die before they get there. And so you wind up they have to catch more. And so did y'all watch Gorillas in the Mist in 9th grade? You know, the gorilla lady, you know, she got killed. There were some poachers in that same area. I think there were 6 rangers that got killed recently got murdered by poachers in the area. Yeah, 6 of them. And so it's dangerous being a poacher. It doesn't pay a lot of, or not a poacher, on poaching patrol, like anti-poacher. And so there's not a lot of money in it. So that's one of the things that, like, how do we fund those to make sure we're protecting those animals? Because if you're Andrew back there living in Taiwan or Thailand or somewhere where there's some tigers left, and let's say you make $1,000 a year, Andrew, and you know that if you kill this tiger that's coming around your backyard, you can get 25 grand for it. You might be tempted, right? Well, and that's probably why we're missing already. I think it's 2 or 3 tiger species have already died out so far that are extinct, and then there's a few others that are, there's more tigers now in captivity, the way I understand it, than are in the wild. And so we could very well wind up with the rest of the tigers go extinct by the end of this century, and still have a bunch of tigers in captivity, but never be in the wild again. All right, and then protecting animal habitats. If you're going to save an organism, you have to save its habitat because it has to live somewhere and eat something, and those are important in terms of making sure they don't die out. And then legislation. 2 pieces of legislation you need to know on page 507. 1, the Endangered Species Act. The Endangered Species Act was passed in 1973 to protect endangered species. This comes with hefty fines, jail times, all kind of stuff. I remember I was in this, the Texaco gas station out here, if you turn out past the school and you take a left, used to be a BP. I was in there one time, probably 10 or 15 years ago, and over they had the radio on, and it was like, I remember this very distinctly. They said, if you have any information leading to the arrest of someone who killed a bald eagle down in, it was somewhere south of town, there's a $5,000 reward. And so, somebody had shot a bald eagle, somebody had found it, and it was still on the endangered species list then, and they were offering a heavy reward, and I'm sure probably an even heavier fine and jail time if they caught the person. So those animals are protected for a reason. And now, bald eagles off the endangered species list because we protected them and helped save their habitat and helped make sure that they were safe. And you probably know this, Colby. A few years ago, there was a nesting pair down by Lake Payne. If y'all don't know where Okmulgee is, the Talladega National Forest, and Lake Payne below town, it's between Moundville and Duncanville. And there's 100,000 acres of national forest. And there's a big lake and campground down there. They've even got a little beachy area. You can go out there and go fishing. I do think there was an alligator out there at one time, so I didn't let my kids in the water. But anyway, they had a nesting pair they were fishing in Lake Payne, and then they were nesting over in Okmulgee off one of those side roads. And we went over there. It was in the middle of summer. I took my kids over there and wife, and we found them. And you could see the pair, they would come take turns coming back, bringing food and stuff into the nest. But anyway, they have significantly bounced back because of the protections in place. And then legislation. So Endangered Species Act incites CITES, the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species. So this is an international agreement basically between most every country in the world has signed this, saying we're not going to participate in the trade of endangered and threatened species. The problem is, like I said, a lot of places don't enforce this, and I don't know if you guys know this, if y'all travel much or have ever been around, and I think hopefully one day you get out more and see the world, that bribery and just mischievous activities are more acceptable in some locations, more so than they are here. Most of the time we hear about bribery here, it's a bad thing, somebody gets in trouble. In a lot of other places, like bribery, you may not talk about it or brag about it, but it is the status quo. And so because there's so many payoffs and things, everything revolves around money, it's very difficult to stop the flow of these animals, either dead or alive. All right, any questions there? One thing I did want to talk about, hunting exotic animals. Y'all remember that dentist that got in trouble on social media, everybody gave him a hard time because he killed an elephant or a lion or something like that? Yeah. You know what I'm talking about? So there are occasionally these pop up when you see someone who's killed a rare exotic animal, like a big elephant or lion or leopard or something of that nature. Now, most of the time when we see those pictures, that's done legally. They go over to country somewhere in probably South or Central Africa, and they kill an animal. So what are the benefits of that, Jordan?
You get paid for it.
Who gets paid?
The person that kills the animal.
Yeah, so most of those exotic animals and big game in Africa are going to be found in like big parks and preserves, kind of like our national parks. And so what happens, let's say you're running a park over there, DeQuinte, and you got an elephant herd. You got a good, strong elephant herd in your park. But elephants are also foundational species, so they like to push down and clear out trees, so they actually clear out part of the forest for more grazing. You want to maintain your forest. So you're either going to have to cull some of those animals, or you're going to have to sell them or move them somewhere else. And if you can't find somewhere to move them or somewhere it's going to take them, then one option is to sell permits. So you sell a permit for, let's say that you've got too many big bull elephants. And so somebody comes in, pays you 60 grand, kills the elephant, and you get that money. Now, what are you going to use that money for?
Cut down the trees.
Protecting so a lot of that goes toward anti-poaching patrols. In a lot of places, they don't have the money to pay that. Man, I read a good article one time, and it was about women in one of these countries. The anti-poaching patrols were like strictly made up of women, and they said they did a better job than men. I don't know, I can't remember what it was. You know what I'm talking about? You ever heard this? It was like a National Geographic article. And it was something about, I guess where it was, they were just more consistent and they were more reliable. Maybe they cared more about the animals. I don't know. They definitely.
I feel like when they came in contact with like people in the village, they'd also be able to have conversations.
Better communicators.
Yeah.
And they're better shots usually. Women typically are better shots if they encounter issues. So anyway, that money most of the time it's going toward helping to promote conservation in those areas. So I know sometimes you see that and you may not like it, and that's okay. But it's also important to know the whole background behind where's that money going, what's it being used for. And then, like in the United States, most of the conservation money that goes toward protecting species and sustainability in fish and game comes from where? Where does the vast majority of money that goes toward protecting? Hunting licenses, yeah. Hunting and fishing licenses, duck stamps. That provides most of the money for protecting the species that we have and maintaining them. So even if you're, not into hunting, then you've got to realize that there is some level of protection there that's provided. And if you get rid of hunters, people aren't willing. Most people on the side, they might want to protect animals, but they may not be willing to throw in the money that hunters are into protecting those animals and buying those game the licenses and whatnot. All right, HIPCO 39. HIPCO is just a handy way of remembering the main things that are causing this destruction of these animals and loss of biodiversity. Number one, habitat destruction. Okay? The rest of these aren't in any particular order, I don't think. Invasive species is an issue. Human population growth. More people you have, the less place you have for organisms. Pollution. Somebody mentioned that the other day. Yes, we kill lots of things through pollution. It can be plants, it can be animals. Climate change. We're going to get more into that later, but we talked about as climates change, that negatively affects how organisms function. And then overexploitation. What does that mean, Andrew?
I have no idea.
Overexploitation?
That's a big word.
You never heard of that?
I
can't spell it, but I know what it means. Jason?
I feel like it's probably not the same sense as how it would be used for humans. I feel like exploiting a human and exploiting an animal are two different things.
Well, typically a little bit, yeah.
I'll know how to describe it.
So it's like trafficking and like circus animals and animals in like reserves and stuff like that. The amount of animals that are going up for like show or for trade or for money and stuff like that is causing a big extinction.
Yeah, so the misuse of them. It could be I think you could probably throw overhunting in that. But like you said, animals that are caught for circus. We talked about the dolphins that are caught for these like dolphin shows where people go swim with dolphins. The beluga whales like in the Georgia Aquarium that were caught off the coast of Russia. And so animals that are caught and they're exploited in those situations Anytime animals are taken out of the wild for those things, then you're taking them out of their natural habitat and reducing their biodiversity. All of those factors lead to a decrease in biodiversity. So, and you can see that if you've got a limited amount and you're pulling them out and you're using them for other stuff, for entertainment, then you're going to decrease the amount of individuals that are in the wild. All right, number 40, habitat fragmentation. Fragment means to break it apart. So most organisms need a certain range or habitat that they live in to provide the resources and food and water and whatever they need. And mates, right? You can't just, even if you had enough for you, even if in a lot of the animals like leopards, sometimes they're going to be, most of the time are like solitary. So they're living on their own, they're hanging out. Eventually you got to go find a mate. And so you got to be able to access a large range in order to find and meet those needs. So one of the biggest obstacles is habitat fragmentation, when larger habitats are like broken up. Now, causes of habitat fragmentation, number 41, construction of roads, pipeline. So roads, like through the Amazon, what did they build recently? What? Highways. So there's actually this thing called and I've drawn a fancy drawing up here. No, that's not it. Oh, where it is. Where is it? Yeah, this is supposed to be the Amazon. Okay. So imagine this like, sorry. I'm going to erase it here. Okay, here's our friends in the Amazon. That's a big section of it, okay? So through the middle of it, they built a highway called the Trans-Amazonian Highway. I got a B- in college in drawing, by the way. And so the big problem with this, not only are you separating and make it difficult for animals to get up, it's still the Amazon's really big here. But the problem is now you've allowed access to the interior of the Amazon. So you have log trucks and people that are going to come in and plant and farm and field. You remember that whole thing on the agricultural thing we looked at in the video? And so people are coming in and they're cutting different sections down, and you wind up with basically a little forest here and a little forest here and a little forest here, and it's all getting split up. And so you're isolating different little populations here and there. And so the problem with this is those organisms maybe not are able to access the resources that they could normally access, like food and water. And it also makes it difficult when you're trying to find a mate. And so you're really limiting their biodiversity, their ability to mate and interact with other individuals. And so that's what's happened. And we see this, you can think of that around here where this whole area was probably forested not that long ago. And now we have little pockets of like forest over here and forest over there. And like we have a few acres, like I own a few acres over there. And so what do you see on the side of the road occasionally? But there are cats dead on the side of the road. Yes, I wasn't thinking of cats. Raccoon, deer, armadillo. Well, armadillos are invasive, so
There's a dead armadillo like right on the
squirrels, possum. So all these things are trying to cross and access resources, and they're getting run over and killed because their habitat has been shrunk down. All right, number
72.
41.
You're 42. The scale of fragmentation has adverse effects on its inhabitants. So where organisms are, where there's habitat fragmentation, it definitely has an adverse or bad effect on them. But that varies from species to species within an ecosystem. So why are some species more negatively affected by fragmentation than others? Yeah.
Some are like generalist species and some are special species.
Okay, some are generalists, and even if their resources are limited, they can access and adapt to other stuff. Some are better at moving around. Like if you're something that's flying, it's probably easier to get from like forest to forest without having to get run over. And some may do okay in smaller little areas where they don't have to move around. Like if you're a little bug, insect, something like that, you're probably okay in living in a small area. You would probably live there your whole life anyway. So some things need more resources. They need to move around more, and then that causes more problems. Like last year, we had a deer on my property that got ran over or got hit and then ran down the woods. And then one day I was outside and like something was potently smelling really bad. And my dog and I went down through there, and like this thing, you could tell it got hit because there was nothing on it that would suggest any bite marks. And it was dead. It was covered in maggots everywhere, but you could tell like it had got ran over on the road and kind of run down through the woods and died. Anyway, fragmentation bad. Number 43, global climate change can cause habitat loss. because of changes in temperature. We talked about our friends the crabs getting their hearts stopping when they heat up too much. Precipitation, we talked about the caribou. You know, there was extra snow some years. Some years it rained in December and froze and caused problems. Sea level rising. If you're a producer, it may affect where you live in the water column as sea level rises, or it also could affect like the intertidal zone if it becomes underwater permanently. And then number 44, I'm racing through here. All right, number 44, some organisms have been somewhat or completely domesticated. All right, I need a drink. What does domesticated mean, Bella?
Made so it can live in a home or something.
Yeah, so just tamed where people can keep it, right? And usually people tame animals for what purpose?
Pets.
Pets?
Or like livestock.
Or to work or farm or to eat stuff, right? Yeah, if you think about any farm animal or any animal that people keep, it's something that's been taken out of the wild, it's been bred for certain characteristics, and then we use it either sometimes as pets, but a lot of times as food for work. Like if you think of like horses or mules, like that's strictly been bred for, you know, working back in the day or riding and getting from location to location. Completely domesticated are now managed for economic returns such as honeybee colonies, and this is one I didn't think about, and domestic livestock. So, you know, those are things that we have taken out of the wild. We basically made them work for us, and we kind of watch over and take care of them. Number 45, though, this is the important part. The domestication can have a negative impact on biodiversity of that organism. Why is that? Yeah, so if you're taking something out of its native habitat, like Layla's over here in Ecuador, and she's going out and capturing macaws out of the rainforest and selling them, naming them Blue, and sending them off to Minnesota, then, she's reducing the number of mates that are possibly there for other animals to breed with in the rainforest. And so, she's getting some money for it, but who else is he going to, what was his girlfriend's name? Rita?
Jewel.
No, her name was Jewel. But the movie was called Rio.
Oh, yeah, Jewel.
Blue macaws are extinct now. The movie did nothing.
Really? They're extinct for real?
Blue macaw, they went extinct I think 2020. Like recently.
Oh my
Yeah,
god.
Like 2019.
Maybe there's some hidden somewhere, some way.
Hidden in the forest like the movie.
Yeah, you have to not see one for so long for it to be considered extinct. And then I remember maybe 5 or 10 years ago, they found some I want to say some kind of primate, or it was like a monkey, like a small one, in some forest down in Malaysia, the Philippines, or Indonesia, somewhere in Southeast Asia, on a game camera when they were looking for something else. And they hadn't seen these things for decades. And they thought they were extinct, and they just happened to find a bunch on game camera. So maybe there's some still out there. Maybe we can take scarlet macaws and dye their feathers blue. Okay. It's not the same. Number 46. Some ways humans can mitigate. Mitigate means to?
Control.
I'm going to say offset the cost. So we have an issue with biodiversity. How do we offset that issue where we're reducing biodiversity? How do we create more biodiversity? So some ways humans can mitigate the impact of the loss of biodiversity include creating protected areas. So one of those, y'all turn to 145 for me in your book, are to create biodiversity or protect biodiversity hotspots. Now, this is worldwide. They've got some listed down. There's actually a good map of they don't really show many in the U.S. here, but there are quite a few biodiversity hotspots in the U.S. as well. And so basically, a hotspot is an area where there's lots of biodiversity, and if you protect that area, it's not usually that big. If you protect that area, then you're preserving massive amounts of biodiversity just by protecting a fairly small area. And it's something we should prioritize because that's how, we're probably going to be able to save the most species. Another example is the use of habitat corridors. Have y'all heard of these? I saw one the other day on the news in, I want to say it was, I don't think there's a picture in your book, in the Smokies. These are where they build a bridge over a highway, and then they make it look all natural, and it connects two different habitats, like two different forests or two sections of a desert. You know what I'm talking about? I've never seen these?
Yeah.
There was a good a video cam of one of these out in Colorado. I watched it not too long ago. And basically, like every night, you had like deer coming across, bear coming across, mountain lion coming across, rabbits coming across. And so, I mean, if I was a predator, I'd be hanging out right there on the side of that joker. But anyway, you had a ton of animals that were moving back and forth on this corridor just to access different resources. So if we are going to make a bunch of highways, the least we can do really is to make some type of corridor to connect them. Sometimes it'll be a tunnel like under a highway, whatever works for you.
That's cool.
That is cool. I'll see if I can find that video. It's pretty cool to see because basically they were just running a loop of a video of a game camera, and every time like something tripped it would video, and then they had the next one. Promoting sustainable land use practices. So like here, below town in our national forest, what do we do with timber? Do they cut timber there?
Yes.
Yes, they cut timber, but what do they make sure they don't do?
Cut a bunch of it.
Cut too much. So they're maintaining and managing that timber for future generations. Out in the national forest, what do they do for hunting? They set laws, they set regulations, limits, and then you have to follow those so you can harvest animals, but you're maintaining the population. So we have to have that. There's going to be people on Earth, a lot of people. We need to be able to use resources, but we need to make sure we're not overusing them. And the last one is restoring lost habitats. And I'll stop with I'll finish with our forest below town here. In the Oak, I don't know if you've ever seen this, Colby. You ever see the big pine trees that are really tall that have the white bands around them? You know what I'm talking about? You know why those are there? So before the colonists came over to Alabama and took over and basically chopped down every tree in Alabama. I think there's like 2 trees I know of in Alabama that are like 300 plus years old. So there's not many old trees. So pretty much every other forest has been chopped down at some point or another in the past few hundred years. And so most of our forests in southern Alabama were what type of trees? Anybody know? Longleaf pine, good. Normally when you see pine trees like planted in rows, those are loblolly. They're not like good long-term pine trees. But longleaf pine trees would live for like hundreds of years. And so anyway, there's a woodpecker called the red cockaded woodpecker that's endangered. It only lives in like big, tall, old longleaf pine trees. And so what they're doing in the forest now, in a lot of national forests, is they're trying to restore those longleaf pine tree habitats because that was what was here naturally. And they're trying to also help that endangered species recover. And so since they're endangered, when they have those trees that actually have a woodpecker nest in them, they paint a big white band around them. It's basically like just a protection for them. And so that's just one way. And they're trying to restore those longleaf pine tree habitats. So they're not planting any other type of pine trees. And they do a lot of forest fire or prescribed burns. Why?
To clear underbrush.
Clear underbrush. And the longleaf pine actually needs fire to germinate. The seeds do. And so that's another way of restoring another part of restoring that habitat. So maybe they're doing something similar where you guys are. All right.